Hi, everyone. Ted Wyman here with another edition of Jet Setting. This time it is NHL Draft and Trade Season edition, and I'm joined by Scott Billeck to discuss the big news surrounding the Winnipeg Jets, which, of course, was the trade of Pierre-Luc Dubois to the Los Angeles Kings. In return, the Jets get 23-year-old forward Gabriel Vilardi, along with veteran forward Alex Iafallo, Rasmus Kupari. I can't even remember Kupari, and they get a second round draft pick. And I mean, that's a pretty good return, Scott. Is it not? The Jets didn't want to have to trade Pierre-Luc Dubois.
Yeah.
It's not their ideal situation, but he didn't want to be here. They had to move him. What do you think of the return?
Yeah, I'm not sure it could have been better, right? I mean, this is the way I look at it is this team added three roster pieces in this trade, got back a draft pick to a second rounder. Oddly enough, funnily enough, Montreal's second rounder next year in 2024, which LA had acquired via trade or last week, I believe, for Sean Durzi, a defenseman. So that's a little kind of funny side note that Montreal was still involved in this trade after all this kind of speculation. But the only thing that the Jets are getting from Montreal is a draft pick. They're not getting Dubois, but for the Jets, yeah, the Jets get a young winger in Gabe Vilardi that could possibly play center for this team, but great metrics. I think with a guy like Vilardi, you're hoping that he slides right into your top six and goes from there. He's been a good player in Los Angeles. I think with this trade, I mean, the Jets go and get three pieces that can fit in their lineup. And Kevin Cheveldayoff talked about it yesterday a little bit with the team's website. Just talking about this kind of diversifies their forward contingent. They obviously lose Pierre-Luc Dubois, and I think like you said on. I mean, in an ideal scenario, they wouldn't have, and they would have signed him long term and had a center for a young center, big center, power forward kind of pivot. A little bit of a rarity, let's say, these days in the NHL. But to go from being kind of having that to being forced to trade him away a year before he becomes a UFA, to turn it into a three-piece, three roster player deal, and still get a draft pick out of it. I don't know how you can look at that as anything other than really a success.
Yeah, very much so, Scott. Very much so. I mean,
like,
and this is a team that they don't get the option really of keeping all their players that they draft, or in Dubois' case, they traded Lyonnais for him, and that's essentially that second round pick that they had. They don't. They unfortunately do not have the the city and the situation that so many players want. And there's a lot of guys who, unfortunately, we've seen it with Jacob Trouba, Andrew Kopp, now Pierre-Luc Dubois, who just they didn't want to be here. And you have to maximize the return. And I think there's a lot of people that are going to say that Kevin Cheveldayoff did just that. There is some aspect of it. Our colleague Paul Friesen certainly doesn't like that they have to trade these players away. He considers that a failure for the organization. I'm not sure I agree with that. I mean, I think it's just playing the hand that you're dealt. And in this case, it looks like there's at least a chance. We won't know for a while, but it looks like at least there's a chance that Kevin Cheveldayoff has drawn an ace.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think this is a trade where you couldn't have expected that. Like, you had basically two teams in the end that were bidding for Pierre-Luc Dubois, and at the end of the day, Montreal Canadiens just didn't have this, the package that would have tempted the Jets to go that route. And you might say that LA almost overpaid for Pierre-Luc Dubois, and people kind of were like, oh, okay, well, maybe Cheveldayoff fleeced them or whatever. I mean, I think when you get to the when you get down to it, it's so rare that you have a center of Pierre-Luc Dubois' size and caliber and that sort of thing available at 25 years old to sign long term without it coming from your own organization, right? And so, I think LA saw an opportunity. With them, they have Anze Kopitar, who's going to be a UFA next summer. So it's possible that Kopitar resigns in LA, but at a cheaper number, and he's still getting up there in age, obviously, as well. So they kind of have a replacement now for Kopitar going into the future. But for the Jets, I think they diversified what their forward contingent, right? Like they added a bona fide top six guy in Velarde. They added a middle six guy in Alex Iafallo, a veteran player who's played 420 games in the NHL. And then Rasmus Kupari is a bit of a reclamation project. I think this is a guy that it's possible that he turns out it's, let's say, I don't want to say it's
he could be more
thing.
than what he has been so far, exactly. Right? He could be.
I think there, a change of scenery for him might do him well. And I listened to Kevin Cheveldayoff yesterday. I think what he said was, there's going to be more opportunities, or they're going to put him in more opportunities in Winnipeg, and so there's a chance for him to kind of revitalize his career. So, Kupari's a former first rounder, but it just hasn't worked out for him, and sometimes that's just the way it goes with some of these young players. I mean, we've seen it here in Winnipeg with Christian Vesalainen, obviously a first rounder that's now back in Finland playing. Didn't pan out.
Same draft as Velarde, I believe.
Yeah, I believe so. It's 2017, right? But yeah, so it's I think the Jets went out and addressed so we even think about last year. I mean, the Jets needed another top six forward. They needed a middle six guy. Those are two things that they addressed today. Obviously, yes, they subtracted, a center, and they might be subtracting the first line center too at some point in Scheifele. But this is the start of a revamping that is expected this summer. And given the parameters, given everything the Jets kind of maybe were handcuffed with this trade, I'm not sure that it could have ended better. And so, I mean, that's a good thing for the Jets when you're forced into a trade like that, to be able to get something better than just, okay, well, we're, like if Montreal was the only team, they would have basically had to, take their offer. Well, luckily for
why should you take it, right? Why should you? You don't have to. But you actually hit on a point that's really important here, and that's that the Jets probably aren't done yet, right? There are more potential moves to come. There's still talk about Connor Hellebuyck, who's obviously a Vezina caliber goalie. There's Mark Scheifele, who had more than 40 goals last season. Blake Wheeler, they've been trying to move him from what we've heard, and they would maybe buy him out if they have to. And the situation is, of course, in my mind, in some point in that, you are going to have to start getting a center or centers back, because you've lost a top six center right now. They don't have anybody in the system, in my opinion, who steps in and replaces them. So, if Scheifele's going out of this organization, they're going to have to get a center or two coming the other way in these deals, because you can't. Everyone knows the hallmark of the NHL is being strong up the middle, having a great number one defenseman, and having a great number one goalie. Well, the Jets would not be very strong up the middle if they move players out and don't bring in others who can do that. I do think I don't know. I guess I'll ask you straight out. Do you think that Scheifele, Hellebuyck, and Wheeler will all be with other teams before the start of next season?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think Wheeler obviously for sure will be. I think he's bought out before, unless Chevy pulls something out of his hat and is able to trade him. I just don't see it. So I think the buyout's coming before the deadline on Friday. I believe it is June 30th. So that's coming. But I was thinking about this last night after. I'm like, well, maybe you could keep those two for now, and if you wanted to go into the season, you would still have Scheifele as your top center, potentially Velarde as your second center. It could be Nemestikov. Let's say if they re-sign him in free agency, and you have Adam Lowry, you still have a good goaltender in between the pipes. But But I think there's no, like, I don't think so. Like, I don't think they bring Mark Scheifele back, and I think if Connor Hellebuck is going to not resign here, not resign here in Winnipeg, they have to trade him this summer because it's going to be the biggest, you can cast the biggest net this summer, even with the goaltender, let's say the glut of goaltenders that are available this
Yeah,
year.
is the market there to make that deal
I
work?
think
That's an important question.
I'm worried. I'd be worried if I was the Jets that you're going to get the full potential of what you could get for a Connor Hellebuck. And I think part of the problem is, like, not only did you have the Vegas Golden Knights win the cup with, Aiden Hill's not a no name, but he's not an elite goaltender in this league either. At least not known as
There's a
one.
good chance they would have won it with Laurent Brossoit too. I mean,
Well, and
they
that's
just
the
had it
thing,
set
right?
up
So
just right.
right, and so you can, right, and that goes to show you can pay. I think their crease when they won the Stanley Cup with Brossoit and Aiden Hill. I mean, obviously they had Jonathan Quick and on the roster still, and Logan Thompson was injured, but I think they won with it was about $4.5 million between the pipes. That was what they were counting at that point about the goalies who played in the playoffs. And the problem with Connor Hellebuck is, he's going to want potentially Andre Vasilevsky money, so roughly around 9.5 million, 10 million a year. And he's certainly earned that. But it's just, how many teams are going to shift to maybe, you don't need a franchise goaltender and that sort of thing. So I'm just curious to see if the market is going to be there for a blockbuster trade for Hellebuck. But that's the thing. It takes one GM to be like, here's a Vezina caliber goalie. Again, he was a finalist this year for the Vezina. I think it's the third time in 6 years. He won it in 2020. So like I think there'll be somebody out there. How many teams are lining up for Connor Hellebuck, especially a long-term deal at that kind of price tag? How many teams are willing to actually kind of fork over that kind of cash? So are the Jets handcuffed on that? I don't know, but I still think they have to make that trade this summer because it's going to be the widest net of teams available to trade him to. So you wait till the deadline or mid-season hoping for an injury. It's a risky game to play, and you potentially lower your return at that point. So, but
Absolutely,
I
no
do think
question.
they're both gone. Yeah, I do. I think all three are gone before next season. I think that's just yesterday was the biggest probably trade that they had to make. It was also the most time sensitive
The
one.
first domino, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I think eventually at the end of this is Dubois was the start, and if they buy out Wheeler, that's doesn't require a trade, but there's more time here to can they find a deal for Scheifele to, let's say, Boston, who might not be without their two top centers next year. So I think there's a lot of time to kind of make these work and see how it does. They're not as time sensitive as Dubois was.
So obviously, this is going to be a very different looking team next season. It already is going to be, and it's going to be much different once any of these other dominoes happen to fall. But it's also NHL Draft Day today, and the first round goes. We're doing this Wednesday morning. Wednesday evening is the first round of the draft. Scott, maybe just a quick little preview of what you expect to see from the Jets. They pick 18th. They've got an opportunity to get a good player there. They've done it in the past. Kyle Connor was in that area, and he turned out to be a great player. I mean, there's something. I think obviously you want to be top 10 this year. You want to be top one only, really, because it's Connor Bedard. But there is always a good opportunity to get something pretty solid in those middle teen rounds, aren't there?
Well, and I think that's it, right? I mean, with this draft being as deep as it is, from the first round into the second round, 18th spot is a good spot to be. It's not, obviously it's not the first overall pick or the second or third. But I listened to NHL or the Jets director of scouting yesterday, Mark Hillier. They have lots of options, and if you look at the draft class, and we did at WinnipegSun.com, I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, and most of them are at forward. If one of these, there's two defensemen, they're both right-handed shots, they could potentially fall as far as 18, but it's not expected. So you can see the Jets taking a forward here, but there's going to be centers available. There's some big wingers that are available. Character guys. I mean, that's one of the things that this team really likes to find in the draft, and they could get that in a guy like Colby Barlow, let's say, the captain of the Owen Sound attack, the Scholastic Player of the Year in the OHL. I mean, those are the things that, you want to talk about Scholastic Player of the Year. That's Josh Morrissey way back when in the Western Hockey League. So, I mean, those are things that the Jets look for on top of being able to play hockey. It's that character, leadership,
intelligence
on their ears, yeah, like that sort of thing, right? So, that's a possibility for them. There's some guys of the U.S. National Development Team program.
They like those guys.
They do. And then there's, but we'll see, because the biggest thing about this year's draft is that a lot of people think, and if you look at mock boards and that sort of thing, it's either a lot of European players or a lot of players even out of the Western Hockey League. And part of that, this is a year that's been one of the first draft years that's really been affected by the pandemic, where some of these players missed a full season of hockey.
Yeah, right.
COVID. But the WHL players are said to have a little bit of an edge because they played a 24 game season in the bubble that year, and so they got some development time in what was a lost year, especially for the OHL, who never played a game that year. So it'll be interesting to see, and there's not a lot of OHL players kind of projected in the first round because of that, and I think a large part of that, so could the Jets finally kind of dip their toes in the first round in a Western Hockey League player, which a lot of people, you look at the Vegas Golden Knights and all the Canadians and Western Hockey League, alumni,
Manitobans even.
teams, Manitobans, exactly. I'm not sure there'll be Zach Benson there from the former Winnipeg Ice, now Wenatchee, I think Wild it is.
Wild, yeah.
But I don't know if Zach Benson's there. Highly unlikely at this point, but there's still options, right? And there's Canadian options. There's Western Hockey League options. There's obviously the American options that they've loved in the past, and there's European options. So the biggest thing for this team at 18, it's not just okay, well, whatever, hopefully you take a flyer. No, there's going to be some quality players in there that are expected to make impacts at the NHL level. So the Jets still have their first round pick. Barring some sort of Scheifele Hellebuck trade, maybe they package Logan Stanley and Harkins together to maybe get back into the second round. I don't know. But they're going to pick first in the first round, again in the third, twice in the fifth, I believe, and once in the seventh, and that's what their draft is shaping up as we talked about this on Wednesday morning. But
well, regardless of what happens there, Scott,
have a good chance. So
right on, yeah. And regardless of what happens with that draft, there's going to be quite a bit more news with this Winnipeg Jets team. You've got the remainder of the draft on Thursday. You've got the buyout window closing on Friday. You've got free agency on Saturday, and then their rookie prospect development camp starts right away on Monday. So you're going to get your full fill of Winnipeg Jets news on winnipegsun.com and right here on Jet Setting. I want to thank everybody for watching us today for this NHL Draft Trade edition of Jet Setting. For Scott Billeck, I'm Ted Wyman. Join us again